The small cafe on Sycamore Street was unusually quiet that Thursday afternoon. Soft jazz hummed from the ceiling speakers while forks clinked gently against plates. At a corner table by the window, an elderly man in a crisp navy suit quietly stirred his tea. His name was Harold Benton, silver-haired, tall but slightly hunched from time, his movements slow but precise. A worn leather briefcase sat on the bench beside him. Across the street, a police cruiser idled. Inside, Officer Ray Millis glanced up from his tablet, his eyes narrowing at the scene through the cafe's wide glass. Something about Harold's posture, the briefcase, the glances toward the window, it raised a flag in his mind. He didn't recognize the man. And in this part of town, unfamiliar often meant unwanted. Millis stepped out, hand instinctively brushing over the grip of his holstered sidearm. Inside the cafe, Harold raised his cup with both hands, unaware. The bell over the door jingled as the officer entered. "Excuse me, sir," Officer Millis said loudly. "Mind placing your hands where I can see them?" Forks froze midair. A hush swept the cafe. Harold blinked, confused. "I'm having tea," he said, his voice calm but unsure. "That briefcase, is it yours?" Harold's brow furrowed. "Of course." "Why?" Millis stepped forward, hand already on his weapon. "Sir, don't move. Keep your hands visible." Gasps sounded from other tables. One woman started recording on her phone. The manager emerged from the back, mouth slightly open, unsure if this was some surreal drill or a mistake. Harold gently set his cup down. Then Millis unlatched his holster. And before anyone could breathe, a new voice echoed from behind. "Put that weapon away, now." The entire cafe turned. Standing just inside the doorway was a middle-aged woman in a gray suit, her badge already held high. "I suggest you holster your firearm before you destroy your career." Millis froze. And Harold finally looked up at her, a faint smile curling at the edge of his lips. Officer Millis turned slowly, his hand still hovering above his sidearm. The cafe was silent, save for the dull hiss of steam from the kitchen. The woman in the gray suit stepped forward with confident strides, her identification held steady. "Special Agent Dana Klein, Internal Affairs," she said firmly. "Lower your hand and step back." Millis hesitated. "Ma'am, you thought wrong," she cut in coldly. "You just pulled a weapon on a man drinking tea. In public. With no visible threat, no backup, and no valid cause." Her voice was sharp, echoing off the walls like a gavel. Harold hadn't moved. His fingers were still resting gently on the table. He tilted his head and looked over at Dana with a subtle nod. She returned it with a knowing glance. From behind the counter, the manager finally spoke up. Is everything all right?" Dana turned to the cafe. "Everything is under control. Thank you for staying calm." Millis looked like he wanted to disappear. His jaw clenched, but he stepped back, removing his hand from the weapon. "I'll ask again," Dana said, "did this man do anything at all, before you walked in?" He looked suspicious. He kept glancing out the window and, he was waiting for someone, Dana interrupted, motioning to Harold. "Me." Millis blinked. "You were about 5 seconds away from pointing a loaded weapon at a senior official's personal mentor," Dana added. "The only reason that didn't happen is because I arrived in time." Harold finally broke his silence. "Thank you, Dana," he said, his voice calm, almost amused. "I was beginning to wonder if the tea was worth it." Dana smiled tightly. "Let's just say your timing is impeccable, as always." Millis looked from one to the other, suddenly pale. "Wait. Who is he?" Harold slowly stood, picked up his briefcase, and turned to face the officer directly. "My name is Harold Benton," he said evenly. "Former Deputy Director of the National Intelligence Board." Millis's knees nearly buckled. The room seemed to tilt. Officer Millis stood there, stunned into silence, eyes wide as if his brain was scrambling to rewind the last 60 seconds. Harold continued, his tone calm but heavy with the weight of history. I've briefed 4 presidents. Spent 30 years working classified operations you'll never read about. And for the past 10, I've advised the Federal Oversight Committee you probably didn't even know existed. Dana folded her arms. And today, he was just trying to enjoy lunch. Millis opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Every eye in the cafe was on him now, some still recording, others in disbelief. The woman with her phone up whispered, "You just tried to arrest a national security advisor." Harold stepped forward, not aggressively, but with deliberate control, the kind earned through years of command and consequence. "I've been profiled before," he said. "But not like this. Not with a hand on a gun. And not in front of civilians." The quiet was suffocating. Millis finally found his voice. I didn't know. "I thought, you didn't ask," Dana said sharply. "You acted. And that's the problem." Harold placed a hand gently on Dana's shoulder. "It's all right." Dana turned to him, surprised. "You sure?" "Yes." He gave her a meaningful look. "But I want it documented." She nodded. "Already is." She tapped her earpiece. "My team's been listening since I walked in." Millis's face drained of all color. I'll file a statement, sir," he stammered. "No need," Harold said. "You'll be doing more than that." He stepped closer, now eye level with the younger man. "You're going to spend the next month shadowing senior civil rights consultants at the Federal Training Academy. You'll sit through every lecture, watch every scenario playback, and answer every question they throw at you. And when you're done, then we'll talk." Millis swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." "And leave the cafe," Dana added. "Now." Officer Millis turned and walked out, his footsteps heavy, his career uncertain. Harold turned back to the table, slowly taking his seat. Dana sat across from him. "You handled that better than I would've." Harold smiled faintly. "That's why I never retired completely. Still a few lessons left to teach." The door shut behind Officer Millis with a soft clang, but the tension lingered like smoke. The cafe patrons remained frozen, unsure if they'd just witnessed a scandal, a miracle, or a brush with something far bigger than their lunch breaks could comprehend. Dana leaned forward slightly. "You really want him to go through the Federal Academy protocol? That's no cakewalk." Harold nodded slowly, folding his hands over the table. "If he can walk into a cafe and nearly make a fatal mistake over a hunch, then yes. He needs to sit with the weight of what almost happened." Dana sighed, glancing at the half-eaten sandwich in front of her. "You always did prefer corrective paths over destruction." "I believe in rebuilding where possible," Harold said, pausing to take a sip of now lukewarm tea. "Burning things down is easy. Rebuilding character takes intention." From the other side of the cafe, the young woman with the phone hesitantly approached. She looked no older than 20, with a college hoodie and a face pale from adrenaline. "Excuse me," she said, clutching the phone in her hand. "Are you, really who you said you are?" Harold looked up with a kind smile. "Yes. But today, I was just a man having tea." Dana chuckled softly. "And he will be again, assuming we can get through one lunch without federal drama." The young woman nodded. "I'm sorry that happened to you. That was wrong." "I appreciate that," Harold replied, his voice warm. "What's your name?" "Lena." "Lena," he repeated thoughtfully. "Remember this day. Not for what almost went wrong, but for how quickly everything can change when someone stands up, or steps in." She nodded again, this time with quiet understanding. "I won't forget." As she walked back to her table, Harold leaned back in his chair. The cafe was slowly returning to its rhythm. Conversations restarted in murmurs. Forks tapped again. Dana raised an eyebrow. Still think the tea was worth it? Harold smiled. Absolutely. Best tea I've had in years. They both laughed, soft and real. Outside, Officer Millis sat in his cruiser, still staring at the dash. The radio crackled with routine calls, traffic stops, a shoplifter, minor collisions. But none of it felt routine anymore. He reached for his phone, and started dialing the training division. 3 weeks later, the sun rose over the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Georgia, casting long golden beams across the parade grounds and classroom buildings. Inside one of the main halls, Officer Ray Millis sat in the third row of a conference room, dressed in plain clothes, notebook open, jaw tight. A retired federal instructor paced at the front, gesturing to a paused video on the projection screen. It was the security footage from the Sycamore Cafe. Now, the instructor said, pointing at the frozen image of Millis with his hand on his weapon, let's talk about perception, judgment, and the weight of presence. The room was full of officers, agents, and deputies from across the country, all scribbling notes. Millis didn't. He was just staring at the screen. At himself. He hadn't known Harold Benton before that day. Now he'd studied his file. He'd read the confidential memos, the declassified missions, and the testimonies from international partners. He'd also read Harold's personal note, left for him at the beginning of the training program. It's not about never making mistakes. It's about learning fast enough not to repeat them, especially when lives are at stake. HB. Outside the building, the world moved on as usual. But inside, for Ray Millis, everything had changed. Back in the city, Harold returned to the same cafe, same table, same tea. He looked out the window with a peaceful expression. This time, no eyes watched him with suspicion. The barista even greeted him by name. Dana joined him again, briefcase in hand. "How's our student doing?" Harold asked. She sat down with a small smirk. "Says he's already applied to transfer into ethics and de-escalation training, as an instructor." Harold nodded slowly. "Good. That means he'll never forget." Dana raised her cup. "To second chances." Harold clinked his gently against hers. "And the power of quiet correction." The cafe hummed with life, as ordinary as ever, and in that ordinariness, a kind of justice had taken root. 2 months had passed since the incident at the cafe. The video, discreetly leaked by someone in the cafe, had circulated online, though it never named names. It was enough to start a quiet conversation across law enforcement circles, the dangers of snap assumptions, the importance of restraint, and the quiet authority of those who don't wear uniforms. Harold Benton remained out of the spotlight, just as he preferred. But within government corridors and federal classrooms, his name came up more often, not because of past operations, but because of what he did that afternoon, sitting in a cafe, with nothing but a teacup and a calm voice. One afternoon, he received a small envelope in the mail. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. Mr. Benton, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you a transformation. The day we met, I thought I was enforcing peace. You showed me what it actually looks like. I'm now training others to think first, and assume nothing. You didn't destroy me. You helped rebuild me. Thank you for choosing the hard road. Arduttam, Harold folded the letter and placed it in the side pocket of his briefcase, the same one that had nearly caused a disaster. Outside, a new recruit waited on a park bench nearby. Harold approached him casually, sat down, and began a quiet conversation about patterns, posture, and the cost of panic. It wasn't a lecture. It wasn't even official. It was simply another cup of tea, another afternoon, and another chance to teach someone what true power looks like, quiet, steady, and absolutely unshaken. Months later, at a national law enforcement summit in Washington, D.C., a special session titled, Beyond the Badge, Leadership, Presence, and the Power of Pause, drew a full house. Officers, analysts, prosecutors, and even federal judges sat in silence as the keynote speaker walked to the podium. It was Officer Ray Millis. Gone was the stiffness, the reactive tone, the defensive edge. What stood before them was a humbled, refined, and deliberate man, shaped not by punishment, but by perspective. He spoke with no slides. No bravado. Just one story. The man I nearly disrespected that day didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't call for my job. He gave me something more dangerous, the opportunity to reflect. He paused. Harold Benton showed me the sharpest form of accountability, dignity under pressure. And it didn't just change me. It changed how I train, how I lead, and how I protect. In the audience, seated near the back in a simple dark suit, Harold Benton watched without applause. He didn't need credit. Watching the ripple was enough. After the session, a young cadet approached Harold in the hallway. "Mr. Benton, do you really believe people can change?" Harold looked at him carefully. "I believe pressure reveals who we are. And choice defines who we become." The cadet nodded slowly, then walked off with more purpose in his step than when he'd arrived. Dana appeared beside Harold a moment later, arms crossed, smiling faintly. "Still changing people with a teacup and a stare." He smirked. "Still works." They walked off together through the marbled halls, two figures rarely seen, but deeply felt, proof that the greatest shifts don't always come with sirens, but with silence, grace, and someone who refuses to stand up angry when sitting still will say more. A year to the day after the cafe incident, Harold Benton returned to Sycamore Street. Same cafe. Same table by the window. Same order, Earl Grey with honey, 2 lemon slices. The staff knew him now. Not as the man from the video, not even as someone important. Just Harold, kind, quiet, always polite. But this time, someone unexpected walked through the door. Officer Ray Millis. No uniform. Just a simple blazer, slacks, and the look of a man who had come not for redemption, but to pay respect. Harold looked up, didn't seem surprised. "Ray. Mind if I sit?" Millis asked. Harold gestured to the seat across from him. They sat in silence for a moment. No tension. Just the quiet echo of how far they'd both come. "I've transferred divisions," Millis said finally. "Community Intervention Unit. Been running joint sessions with mental health teams and veteran liaisons." Harold nodded approvingly. "Good." Millis reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. Inside was a commemorative coin, not from the department, but from a joint civil training corps that Harold had helped establish years ago. He slid it across the table. "You founded the program. Now I help teach it." Harold studied the coin, then closed the box gently. "You earned that. Not from what you were, but from what you chose to become." Millis looked down. "It was almost a disaster that day." "But it wasn't," Harold said. "And that's why you're here now." They sipped their drinks. No cameras. No agents. Just two men who had once met at the edge of conflict, and now sat together in quiet understanding. Outside, traffic passed. People hurried by, unaware. But inside, two paths that had nearly collided had now converged, not through force, but through humility, learning, and the long, slow arc of integrity. Later that evening, Harold stood alone at a quiet overlook just beyond the city, watching dusk settle in. The skyline blinked to life as streetlights and office windows lit up like fireflies. He wasn't a man who chased recognition. But he understood something very few did, that influence, the real kind, often left no echo. It moved quietly, shaping lives like wind shapes stone. His phone buzzed in his coat pocket. A message from Dana. Millis was offered a regional leadership position. He asked if you'd vouch for him. Harold smiled faintly and typed a short reply, "He already earned it." Then he put the phone away. Behind him, a quiet shuffle of footsteps approached. A young officer in training, no older than 24, stopped a few feet back. She looked unsure whether to speak. "You're him, aren't you?" she finally asked. Harold turned, recognizing the hesitation. "Depends on who you think I am." She stepped closer. "The man who changed the system without burning it down." Harold chuckled lightly. "I just had tea. The system changed because someone chose to see differently." She nodded slowly. "We study you now. In every academy across 5 states. The Sycamore Cafe Standard, they call it." He raised an eyebrow. "Catchy." She smiled. "It reminds us, authority is only as strong as the restraint behind it." Harold looked out at the city once more. "Then maybe," he said softly, "we're finally getting somewhere." The young officer saluted him without being asked. Then walked away, her stride steady. And Harold Benton remained a while longer, letting the wind pass through his coat, one man, still, in a world slowly learning what strength really looks like. It was a quiet morning 1 year later when a simple bronze plaque appeared near the corner table of the Sycamore Cafe. No fanfare. No press. Just a small inscription, "In honor of moments that change everything," quietly. The Sycamore Standard, EST Year 1. The cafe had subtly become a pilgrimage spot for new recruits, policy leaders, and changemakers. Not because of a viral clip. But because something deeper had taken root, an example of dignity that reshaped a culture from the inside out. Harold Benton never once asked for the plaque. He visited less frequently now, but when he did, the staff always had his tea waiting. A new generation of officers, agents, and leaders had taken up the path he paved, some directly shaped by him, others indirectly inspired. At a national conference on training reform, a speaker closed their remarks with a phrase now printed in federal manuals: "When in doubt, remember the man with the briefcase, the teacup, and the unshakable calm. If you don't know who you're speaking to, treat them as if they might be the one who wrote the rules." Back at the cafe, a mother and her young son sat near the plaque. The boy asked what it meant. She smiled and answered, "It means you don't have to shout to change the world. You just have to stand still, and know who you are." Outside, life moved on, unaware that inside this quiet cafe, history had bent just slightly. Not with a shout. But with stillness. And the decision not to pull the trigger.